that slow fade out. It's good. One day we're going to change that, and I'm going to have no idea when it actually ends. Right now, I've got a pretty good idea. I can watch it. I'm like, okay, I need to sit back down. I can't be running around there pushing buttons anymore. It's going to start. I need to get back over there. And then that nice soft fade out, and then we're good. But
Matt's going to change it and not tell you.
I know that's exactly what it's going to be. I'm going to be like, oh, there's a regular video. Click on it, and oh, no, it's different. And he's probably watching and being like, I'm going to do that. All right, everybody. Well, that is Justin Armenta from JA Digitizing Studios at JA Digitizing Studios. And I'm Jeff Fuller from Fuller Embroidery Works. And today we are talking hats and more hats. So
hats.
It's a subject that is, it's talked about a lot. It seems like people have this love-hate relationship where either they love it and they run tons of them and they don't have any issues, or they hate it because when they try to run them, all they have is issues. And there's not a lot of in between. It's one or the other.
Personally, when I'm on a machine and hooping, I like hats over than flats. So to me, I think my brain goes to more precision, keeping things constant, variables not change very much. And when you're looking at a hat that's got a center seam, where it goes in the hoop. It's kind of a routine, a kind of groove you get into, and especially on bigger orders when you're hooping hats. So that's my personal opinion on liking them or not.
I can honestly tell you I prefer hats, and the reason is because of placement. It's so much easier to place a design on a hat than it is to place a design on a garment. Yet, I've got robes that I got to do right now that are the classic fold over, and I'm sitting there going, okay, well, they want a left chest, but the right flap folds all the way over.
Right.
So we're just gonna stick it, and I stick my thumb out and eyeball it and go, hopefully that's level. And when they wear it, hopefully it's level. I've been known to throw on a garment or two and say, okay, well, let me put a piece of tape here where I would put the logo, and then take it off and do some measurements. And as always, make sure you write that down, because when they come back, I guarantee they'll come back. If you don't write it down, they'll come back and they'll go, okay, well, I want it in the same spot as last time. And you just kind of get that look on your face like, oh, crap.
Yep, absolutely.
But let's go ahead and grab some of the comments here. We have Kingsbury Crafts joining us. Hello. Yep. Hi. If you can type the pronunciation of your company name, the first word, I got the second one, I would greatly appreciate it. But hello and welcome for joining us. We have TMG Custom Designs joining us as well. We have Barb LaFawn checking in from North Central Minnesota. And watching from studio in Nebraska. That is where Matthew thinks everybody should move to, is Nebraska. So if you're in Omaha, that's even better, because Matt thinks everybody should move to Omaha. Just underscore that right there. We have Frank Dunn joining us from the UK. Hello, Frank. And TMG is watching from Las Vegas. Awesome. We have Eileen. Good evening. I don't know where she's watching. I was going to say she's watching from, and then I realized she didn't put it. It was. We have Miss Ramona McKee. She's watching from her tablet tonight. That's where she's located, her tablet. Nope, she's located in Illinois. We have Jesse Gibson checking in. Hello. We have She Shed from North Carolina. Welcome. Newport, Rhode Island. Suzanne from Newport, Rhode Island. I know her. She's a council member, in case you were wondering. Letty, council member. Good evening, Letty. Welcome and joining us. And Vogue. I'm going to say it's Vogue, like the magazine.
Ah, okay. I would have never guessed that.
No, I would have gotten that wrong so many times, and then I would have felt really, really bad. I still feel bad when I get somebody's name wrong, just in general. But now that we've burned through that list that, we've got a lot of conversation. We've got a lot of conversation going on in the chat, which is awesome. If you guys have any questions, statements, comments, make sure you drop them there, and we will do our best to bring them up. As long as they are relevant to the topic matter. And always relevant. We have our nerd from the north, Mike Muldowney, saying, I can't stay. Have a good show, guys. He is from Canada.
Thanks for dropping in, Michael.
Yep. Dropping in. So I guess, we can start talking about caps here, I think probably the easiest thing to do would be go over common terminology. So when we're talking about this, that people that are watching the show, if they don't have a lot of experience with caps, they know what we're talking about.
Okay. So I grabbed a handful of different style hats here. This one here it's actually the 112 knockoff that is from Sanmar, but this is the dreaded one that everybody dislikes. I guess I should have grabbed some colored hats so you can see them better. But yeah, this is a mesh back hat. Some basic terms like Jeff was saying that so everybody knows what we're talking about here. Let me back up a little bit. Of course, you have grab a lighter colored one, might be easier to see. Of course, you got the bill of the hat. This area is going to be the crown of the hat. When you're talking about left or right panel, that's when the hat is typically centered in one of these two sides of the hat, the panel. The enclosure is usually the back. Fitted hats or flex fit hats are going to have a solid enclosure. Of course, I didn't grab one of those. But as far as the adjustable hats, typically you're going to see either a Velcro like this, where it's a Velcro enclosure, the old school snapbacks, which is the plastic snaps in the back. There's a couple of different other ones when you get into kind of the more casual hats.
So here I've got the flex fit.
There you go. Flex fit hats, which has the full enclosure. Flex fits, if anybody doesn't know, typically depending on what brand you go with, there's at least two sizes they come in, usually like a small, medium, large, extra large. Flex fit does have some.
They have three sizes. They've got the small and medium, large and extra large, and 2X to 3X.
Right. The double X, triple X only comes in like basic colors. The other two sizes come in quite a bit of colors. I know the new era flex fit version of their hat, it comes actually in three sizes. It's a mesh back flex fit that they have as well. Depending on the brand, like I said, it's either 2 to 3 sizes. They kind of break it up. And what that does is it's not an exact fit style hat like you get a pro hat. Typically, when you go to a sports store and you're actually going to get like a Major League Baseball hat or something like that, they have actually fitted hats where it gives you an exact size, like a 7 or a 7 1/4. Those are going to be kind of one size, exact size that fits. The flex fits kind of give you a range. And every brand where it gives you the description of the hat in their catalog, it's going to give you a range of what that fitted hat goes, like something like 6 3/4 to 7 1/2 or something like that, whatever that range may be. There's some different adjustable buckles out there. There's some fancier hats that have leather buckles or leather straps with buckles on the side. They might have like a silver or a gold buckle over here. As far as the crown's concerned, you're going to have your basic crown styles. This one it's a constructed hat. It's still a constructed hat. And what that is they're just going to be the buckram inside. This is that white area here, and that's added to the inside of the hat. That's actually going to give you a structure. But if you can see that this hat is probably a low profile or a mid profile hat. I think it's a mid profile. It's not too low, but that's where the hat slopes back a little bit and doesn't stand up very tall. Like this one here. Wrong one.
I can honestly tell you, if you get a hat on sale, it's probably a low profile hat.
Exactly. This one here, let me see if I can get a light. That might help here. Yeah, I would say that the majority of people, baseball hats are typically sports orientated. So typically they are going to, yeah, there's a little better. Okay. So this particular hat here, you can see that it has a high profile. So this is going to be usually a high profile or a pro fit. They also call it depending on the brand, but you can see how high it sits up. Typically you're going to have that real rigid kind of peak here that goes back and it doesn't slope back. This particular style hat has a flat bill as opposed to a curved bill. This is a pretty popular style. Um, the snapback flat bill pro style hats are kind of coming back in style. They used to be pretty popular, I'd say, probably in the 80s, early 90s. Another term that you're going to hear as far as a 5-panel or a 6-panel hat. A 6-panel hat, you're going to have the seam down the center, and what it is it's basically telling you that there's 6 total panels that make up the hat. So if we should have had Adam on here, be a hat expert.
He's a jujitsu.
Oh, so this is an example of a 5-panel hat. Again, this is where the actual center of the hat has no seam down the center. So they actually are treating this as a full front panel as one of the panels. So you have the 4 panels in the back, and then the front panel being the 5th panel. So 5-panel hats are kind of nice because when you're running 3D puff, you don't have to worry about that thick seam to go through when you're trying to get that foam to be working. So that's one of the pointers that I was going to come up with as far as discussing today is limitations and how to change gears to make sure that your design is going to work on the hat. So
wait, I have a question.
Yeah.
When you talk about profile, so if you make your own hat and you add an inch to the profile, what do you call that?
I don't know.
Got it. I was curious if it was a medium, a high, an extra tall.
Okay. It sounds like you're trying to entrap me into saying something there. Here's an example of a buckle. I didn't know I had one here, and this is actually an example of a unconstructed hat. As you can see, when you put that on, it's just going to go ahead and kind of fall backwards. There is no buckram in this hat, so there is no structure to it.
They call them dad hats a lot.
Yes, that's the dad hat that you're going to hear. Here's another example of that completely floppy, no structure hat, low profile, no structure. That is the dad hat. So I know there's some specialty hats out there that are a little bit different, like the 7-panel hats that have kind of a weird front to them, where this front area is actually split vertically instead of with the seam down the center up and down. They actually have one going across, where the bottom section kind of gives you this little weird window to embroider in. Those are 7-panel, right? Is that what they call them?
Yeah, I want to say they're 7 because it's the one in the front and then it has the 2 little triangles on the top.
Right.
They also have this weird racing one that's like a 3-panel hat.
Oh, really?
It's 2 giant panels here and then a flat. It reminds me of a wig.
So those are, I would say, the most basic hats out there.
So wait, I if I remember right, so you covered the brim, you covered the structured, you covered the profile, sweatband of the hat. That is going to be this little band inside the hat here that you can see that you're going to need to fold out when you're hooping. That is your sweatband. Some hats you're going to actually have a little bit wider of a sweatband that you could work with. Some are going to be sewn in here about 150 times, so you have a real thick seam there. So actually, interestingly enough, this stitch line that runs across the front goes through the sweatband. So depending on how high that stitch line is how far up your sweatband's tacked, and that stitch line actually helps fold that buckram and give the structure to the front of the hat.
Right.
It's interesting to see what happens when you don't put that in and then when you do put it in.
You can see here that sweatband that you fold out so you can get it onto your hat hoop properly. So,
all right, well, let me grab some comments just to catch up here. So,
sure.
Letty thinks we should change the name of all the hats to the Needle Buster 112s. And I like it. And we have Nikki joining us, and she says that, that was the style back before Jeff was born.
This is true.
Ramona prefers to work with a 5-panel herself. TMG says you call that an inch plus profile, because we used that last year. 2 years ago in the puff off. Just added an inch. It was great.
Oh, I see what you're getting at. You're just bringing up your cheating ways.
Creative winning. Nikki says, are there size limitations on dad hats versus structured hats with height?
As far as I would say the term dad hat is pretty much referring to all the low profile hats. I think the dad hat can be unconstructed or constructed, but the low profile hats are the ones that are considered the dad hat. So
yeah, and you definitely get a height restriction on there. A lot of times, with machines, some of them when they come from the factory, they're limited to 2 inches. Some of them it's hard coded in there and you can't change it. Others you can change the parameters. Like I know my Ricoma, I could change the parameters and open that up so I can sew higher. But some of them are a hard 2 inches and you can't go past that. So when you start getting into the low profile hats, the sewing arm actually comes up and it pushes into the crown of the hat, and that's where your restriction comes in. So once it starts pushing into the top ridge of the hat, it starts deforming the front panels and your registration is going to go off. And your machine can rip a hat by pushing on that too hard if you're not careful. So that would be your size limitation. And for low profile hats, I'd say, I don't know, I go about 1.5 inches, 1.75 inches. Seems to be about what you can pull off before you start moving into the mid profiles. Then you're going to get anywhere from 2 to 2.5, depending on the front type. Because I know the one that you showed that has that hard point on the top. A lot of times you actually get a smaller sewing field because of that hard point when the sewing arm hits into the bottom of that. Then you would a mid profile that has a nice rounded point to it.
Right. So that hard point does kind of give an area that kind of gives you some problems if you have a design. And this is where you really need to speak to your customers about, not every design is going to work on hats, period. And then not every design is going to work on every style of hat. Typically for dad hats, you're going to want to try to go with a design that is shorter and wider. So if you're trying to fill that hat up as far as the front of the hat with the design, you don't want something maxing out at 2.5 inches that you possibly could get on a high profile hat. And your machine is going to definitely make a difference. Not only is the parameters something that is going to be something you can't get around on certain machines. I know there's one customer that I kept on giving him at 2 inches, and he kept on saying that his machine won't allow it. It was giving him a rack limit. And finally, I figured out that his particular machine, it was 1.9 inches was his max. So that was something I had a note on I think it was a brother kind of home machine that he was working with. But yeah, not only that is you start getting into kind of the big boy machines in the industry, the ones that are made for commercial use. You got your Tajima, your Barrett, your ZSK. Those are unfortunately, the whole theory of you can do hats on any machine. You can do 3D puff on any machine. Yes, that's in theory, that is correct in one way or another. But I'm telling you right now, every ZSK user that I have, I've heard them say Richardson 112s are no problem, because those beasts will sew through anything pretty much.
Just run a 2x400.
Right. I've had Barrett users. There's a couple of Barrett users that I do a ton of 3D puff for hats. That's the majority of their work. Not only are they kind of have some weird quirks where ZSK and Barrett users, they can actually do wider stitch lengths. So they can do quite a bit wider on the 3D puff. They can do bigger sewing areas, as I'm sure everybody's seen Viter Digitizing out there that does these crazy tall 3D puff designs. He's running ZSK, so his sewing field is definitely bigger on those high profile hats. But yeah, that's where you kind of look at the design. A lot of times you're going to have to change a design or simplify a design or adjust it in a way just so it'll work on a hat, but you also need to look at the hat style.
Right. So, okay, we got that one. Catching up on the comments here. So, Barb says, I deal with the stretchy youth league baseball caps this time of year, and that's something too. When you start getting into the smaller hat sizes, they fit tighter on the driver, and that
Right.
can cause you a restricted sewing field on the front because there's less room for movement. Letty says, I can say I have broken a total of 2 needles on hats.
And Letty does run ZSKs, correct?
She has one, yes. Just a single head, I think is what she said later down. Single head, and she loves it. And I don't know. I don't think I've broken a needle on my ZSK yet. I've changed them because, they start to wear and you get looping every now and again. But I don't think I broke one. And I haven't broke one on the Happy in a while. I should do something ridiculous just to break a needle. We'll think about that.
Here we got Jeff going again.
Yep. So Rob says I just got a brand new ZSK forehead. It's amazing. Absolutely.
That's awesome.
Just did a car plastic-based floor mat on my ZSK. I could do that. We'll think about that. We have Dave joining us. Welcome. Like I said, Letty's got a single head. Ramona says, I haven't tested it yet, but her new SWF KX machine has a 3-inch tall stitch area for hats. A lot of the machines, they have that restriction. Some machines, it's when you put the cap driver on that it recognizes that the cap driver is on. There's a switch or whatever. It recognizes it and it restricts your sewing field. On commercial machines, generally you can tell it, I don't have a hoop on.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can extend out that sewing area. But you always have to be careful because, nobody wants a broken reciprocator. It's always hold my beer until the reciprocator breaks. And then you've got a big problem because the head just got to come off. That's something that I'll keep in stock. So Suzanne says, in 25 years of embroidery, I just did my first order of 100 Richardson hats. They love them and are ordering 300 more. It was a learning curve. I think Richardson's definitely test your hooping. For sure.
They do.
And hats are my nemesis. All right, I'm caught up.
And the hooping is definitely going to be your number one problem when it comes to hats, especially with those newbies out there. Hooping period is, I think, one of the hardest learning curves when you get into embroidery. But hooping a hat properly, not only do you have to get it centered, especially when you're using the 6-panel hat, because you want to make sure that your needles are lined up dead center on that seam, especially when designs are symmetrical, because there's nothing worse than having a design that's symmetrical and you're a millimeter or two off center, and now that design completely looks off center on your hat. If the design's not balanced well and you've got more information over here on your design than over here on your design, I think you're never going to see if you're a millimeter or two off center. But typically hats are going to have symmetrical designs. They have oval, circles, wings on either side, something like that. That's typically what you do, or even just a single letter in the center. So being on center is definitely
see, and I'm like of two thought processes, I guess, and this is how I handle it when I place designs. It's either going to be where it's supposed to be and correct, or I'm going to make sure that it's so far off it looks like I tried to do it that way.
Right. Which I think in theory it kind of led to the fad of having the design on the left panel. Someone was so far off and like, oh wow, that looks kind of cool.
Yeah, they're just like, But you have less placement problems when you're running a single head versus multi-head. With a multi-head, your hooping has to be consistent because every hat that you throw on there is going to sit at a different point, where with the single head, you can adjust your design left to right for it.
Exactly. Yeah. And another thing on a multi-head machine, you definitely want to make sure that all your frames, your hat frames on the machine are zeroed out properly, because you can be hooping all day, pinpoint on center. And if you have a head or two that are off, that are actually on the frame itself, that head's never going to be on center. So that's something you want to definitely from time to time kind of have your hats right on the machine, or even just looking at your hat frames. They have that little notch. Well, it does in Tajima, I'm not sure on the other machines. They have that little notch in the center. that you can eye and make sure that everything's lined up to your needle, that notch in the center. It's something you want to keep an eye on, because every once in a while things start wearing out. You have a bird's nest, things get a little wonky. So that's
Stuff
one thing.
breaks, fires happen. So.
Exactly.
So,
Which leads me to actually one of the questions here, as far as to clip or not to clip.
see, I was going to pull that up. That's great minds think alike. I mean, it was
Yes.
also a comment in there, so there was that too.
So I would like to hear your theory on this, Jeff.
So if it's a structured hat, I don't worry about it. If it's an unstructured hat, I clip it.
Structured hat, unstructured hat. So with that theory, I follow the same rule. Now, I don't want to say that what we're saying here is 100% of the time you do it every single time. You may have that job where, for whatever reason, a clip on a structured hat sews better. You may have a job, for whatever reason, no clip on an unstructured hat sews it better. But mainly, when you're trying to hoop something like this, and this hat just wants to pull every single direction that you're pulling on, once you stabilize it with that stabilizer, that backing, and you're trying to get that hat nice and smooth in the front, you're definitely going to want those clips down at the bottom to make sure that everything is going to stay in its place. Otherwise, if you don't have those clips down here, you can see how these sides of the hats can move quite easily.
I mean, just you're moving it from the cap driver to, or the cap frame, the hooping station, to the cap driver, you can knock that center seam off on an unstructured hat, and you'll have a crooked seam. And you
absolutely, and that's another thing too. When you're hooping, that center seam there, pulling left to right, your seam's going to start going over. So kind of using those clips down at the bottom, it's going to help center everything as well.
I will throw this out there. You can get a hat with a crooked seam. I'm just going to put that out there now. You can get a hat with a crooked seam.
Happens
Sometimes
all the time.
It's not you.
Happens all the time. There was actually someone that found a source of, I believe they were even the Richardson, found a source to buy them online, brought in their own hats. Again, it was a design that was very, very symmetrical. And they kind of brought some hats back unhappy that it wasn't centered. And I started looking at the hats and measuring, how far it was from seam to the side of the design, seam to the side of the design. And I'm like, this is dead center. Our operator did a good job. And I started looking at the seams, and you can see that they're sewn like this. So at the bottom of the design, it was dead center. But by the time it reached the top of the design, it wasn't. So, and light colored hats tend to show that more. You can see the seam more apparent. So again, something you got to look at, and why 5-panel hats might be a good choice too if you are running into that problem. So
I mean, definitely for puff, 5-panel hats are a lot nicer because you're not dealing with that center seam. And when you're already punching through, EVA foam, you're adding height and extremely high densities, taking that 3-4 layers of fabric out of the equation definitely helps.
Exactly. And as far as the clips on the structured hats here, backing or not, a structured hat like this is going to pretty much stay in place when you're hooping. Having something pulling down on the sides here really isn't going to change much. So I think it's just one step that you can kind of ditch, and your hooping is a little bit faster if you're, in high production. So
I can honestly say that sometimes, in this is in my experience, don't take this as law, but when I'm using clips on structured hats, I'm introducing ripples into the front of the hat. Mm-hmm. I can have it sitting nice and soft, and just by the act of pulling in on those sides and clipping it, now I'm getting rippling. So,
yeah. What happens a lot is when you're pulling here is because this front is so structured and you're pulling on those sides. You can see that dip. This is a little extreme, but that's the type of stuff that you're going to start causing, trying to get the sides really, really tight when the structure of these hats are already going to give you that.
Yeah. So I'm going to say here, Suzanne says, I'm interested in trying the long screwdriver technique that was posted. My problems were usually at the bottom. Beginning holding the start button helped. So that's generally on your first couple of stitches, that's designed so that your cap will pull down to your backing.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times when you're having the trouble there, it's because there's a gap between your backing and your hat. And when the needle comes in, it's the cap's bending down and it deflects your needle just a little bit, and it'll cause breaks, or, you know, it can pull your needle away from the rotary hook a little bit. And so now your rotary hook misses and you skip some stitches here and there. But generally that's so. Holding the start button on a Baradin, I believe, runs it slow for the first, I think, until you let go of it. So you just
same as Tajima, correct? Yeah.
See, I have a turtle button, and it actually has a picture of a turtle on it,
and it'll go that,
and it goes slow. So I call it turtle mode. But you know, that's it's just one of those fun things. But she says sometimes the unstructured hats gets wrinkled, and you need the clips. If it is smooth, then no. And I've found, honestly, when I'm doing the unstructured hats, a lot of times they're okay, but it's the top of the hat. It'll shift one way or the other as I'm moving it or messing with it. And that's, you know, trying to keep that seam straight, especially when I'm just, I don't know, it bothers me when the seam is crooked. I will throw a hat away if the seam is crooked. I'm like, yep, nope, garbage can. Won't even donate it. It's they'll look funny standing up, but.
One trick I have used, especially on, I don't know if everybody's used those Nike hats that are basically like this, but the material is extremely, it's almost like a umbrella. That's how thin it is. But not only do you put your piece of backing that goes across the front of your crown. I've used the second piece that actually you kind of do a cross where you come up from the center and use the piece vertically, and it kind of structures the hat, kind of gives it a little bit more stability, kind of gives it where it's kind of replacing the buckram on the hat, because it is kind of giving it some form up here towards the top of the crown. That's definitely a trick I've used in the past for those really, really, really floppy hats, just to give you that extra structure. I can honestly say that video that Suzanne was just referencing, I was interested in trying that out, and I actually did today. So I had some extra Richardsons in that video. Let me see if I can pull that up here.
I mean, I could tell you I've done it, and I've used my thumb. So it's when I first started, I had a lot of problems with hats, and I went out and I looked for tricks and tips, you know, whatever. I found that you can steam the hats, it softens the buckrams. I used a hair dryer for a while. I literally set the hair dryer inside of the hat and set it down while I had one running. I had one on the hair dryer. You know, it's what you end up doing is you're massaging that machine, the seam. I can't say that fast. So when you initially sew and when you watch a hat run, you can see that there's a little step up where the cap hoop is and that initial seam is, and that's put in there by your embroidery machine when it pulls that fabric down to the stabilizer. So what you're doing in that case is you're massaging the seam down and you're putting that curve in before you start sewing. So it brings your seam down closer to your backing. It works. Just be careful not to mark your hat, because you can actually mark your hat if you're running something wood-wise, or some metals will actually mark your hat, or if you rub your thumb across it enough, you will mark it. I know that from experience, but it is one of those things that actually works, but it's not something that I do anymore. So I used to do, you know, like I said, I used to hair dry them. I used to rub the seam down. But it's not something that I do anymore right now. When I want to run a hat, I hoop it and I run it. But sometimes you get those stubborn hats that have, I think that there are inconsistencies in manufacturing, especially when it comes to adhering the fabric to the buckram. And so, you know, sometimes you get those hats that you need those tricks. You'll get one, you could be running a case of Richardsons and you get one box that's just all you do is break needles, and then you move to the next box and you don't have any more problems. So it's definitely one of those tricks that are good. So hold on, Justin. I'm going to catch some questions. So I'm just reading here. We have Shauna Lee. I hope I got that right. What is your trick for stabilizing placement? Do you cut it on a curve or you just use it straight? So when I put stabilizer on, I tuck the stabilizer inside of the hat and I put the hat on the cap driver, and then I run the stabilizer smooth. And that will kind of, it reminds me of a crinkle on the top. The top will kind of crinkle and it'll ripple a little bit up near the crown, where across the front where you're actually going to be sewing is going to be smooth. Mm-hmm. So I kind of let the hat form the stabilizer. I just, it's, what is it? 4 by 14 is what I use, or 3.5 by 14 stabilizer. And so I just allow that to kind of form the hat. I don't know if you cut it any different, Justin, or you just
no. Yeah, the of course the width of the design is, you're gonna want enough stabilizer on there. You don't need a. I think what she's asking is maybe cutting the top to a curve so it kind of contours the inside of the curve of the hat. I've never seen anybody do that. I don't think it's going to make any much difference, but you definitely want a piece wide enough where you could actually be able to get it clamped into your hoop. It's going to be stabilized in there. Even though your design may be 2 inches wide, you don't want to use this small little piece of backing, because if you're only doing it in a small little area, you're not going to actually have it clamped into your hoop and stabilized.
So the smallest piece I'll use is 8 inches, and that is the full width of the front.
Right.
I personally like to do a 14-inch piece, and I use a 14-inch piece on every hat that I run, because I feel like as the band goes around the sides too, it helps hold the fabric in that area clamped tight. So, but I've also used an 8-inch piece when I'm doing, you're doing a 2-inch logo on a left quarter panel placement. You can just use a shorter piece. Mm-hmm. But you want to make sure that you're doing enough to secure the top of the fabric when it's shifting and going over the needle plate. That's one thing that I see a lot of people that say, "Oh, I don't need to use backing as a structured hat." I am in the camp that you do, because I have had it where I've tried that when I was new, and I had a hat that it was coming back over, and the middle seam actually caught on the side of the needle plate, and it ripped a big hole in the front of my hat. And for, I don't know what, 14 cents maybe, I don't have that problem. I've got something nice and smooth that's going to make sure that seam stays up above it.
Right.
But you see people, they'll say, "Oh, well, I don't need to." I found that in addition to that, my smaller details come out a little bit quicker because they stay out wider. They don't collapse in as much with that extra structure. I don't know. What do you think, Justin?
I couldn't get that video to play, but what she was referring to, what Suzanne was referring to, was actually for that reason. A lot of times, if you aren't getting that stability from your backing, you are going to get those times where, as you can see, these rigid hats, they do tend to pucker at times. And if you're not getting the stability of this area, tacked down when you start your design, there may be times where you're sewing and this hat wants to either create a bubble or an indentation, and that will throw off the registration on your hats, cause deflection, and get you needle breaks and thread breaks. So there is benefits of using the backing, even though it is a structured hat. But the video that she was referring to, it is a post in the Embroidery Nerd group, if you want to check it out. I've seen this in the past. It's not a brand new technique that I've seen, but where they're actually taking, they have a pretty long screwdriver, and they actually bent it a little, so there is a little bit of a curve in it. But after they're hooping, they're actually running that screwdriver down the seam, and it's, in theory, what it's doing, it's loosening up those fibers and loosening up that really heavy duty seam that you get in the 112. I tried it today. I actually ran a design that recently we were having some difficulties with, so we knew it was already a problematic design on that style of hat. I had my operator hoop it the same. No screwdriver down the center, and then I had and she also in that video they were discussing actually sliding back the backing. So typically when you pull the sweatband out, you're going to be tucking that sweatband into your frame, and you're going to have your backing pretty much parallel to the edge of your sweatband. That's normally what you do, just a normal way of sliding everything into that hat frame. They mentioned that when they're putting the sweatband into it, they're actually pushing the backing a little bit further back, so it starts right at the crown seam. So if you're looking from the front, that backing is actually starting right behind that beginning of your crown. I don't know in theory why that would help. The person that posted said that they've been doing it for a while now, and it helped quite a bit, and they don't have any problems with Richard 112s. But I had my operator hoop it that way, and she also ran the screwdriver down. Neither hat were having the problems that we were having when we actually had the design in production. They weren't getting any needle breaks. But after it was sewn, I did see that there was less areas that had those kind of weird indentations and puckers on the hats that we did do the screwdriver. So, and I had to run it 3 times on different designs. So it was kind of it wasn't just a fluke that I saw it. Another thing that the design that we were running, of course, had small lettering at the bottom. So that's a nightmare situation to have small lettering, Richardson hats right in the seam. It's a perfect storm of having nightmares. But we were actually inching at the beginning of the design as well, when it got to that small lettering at the bottom to help sew through the seam. But not only was there less of the puckering, but the small lettering tend to sew a little bit cleaner on the hat that we did the screwdriver. So I wouldn't say it was night and day as far as the difference, but it did help. So if you are having that kind of that problematic design that you've pulled your hair out and you've either digitized it correctly or you digitized it correctly, because it's in my brain, it's always kind of working your way backwards when you have an issue. If it's the same head every single time that's having thread breaks, needle breaks, whatever it is, then obviously you need to focus the problem on that head. If it's on the same needle, then it's obviously on that needle. Then you're working back as far as the mechanics on the machine. There's something might be wrong, your timing or something like that. Not only in the actual sewing field, a lot of times you need to look on how your hat hoop is connecting to the frame on the machine. We are actually having one of the heads, it kept on getting out of registration, and we noticed that I was watching it run, and the hat, when it was sewing towards the bottom of the crown, of course, when it's sewing closer to the crown, the back of your bill is going to be hitting the back of your machine. So what it was doing, it was actually the bottom wheel. Tajima has 2 clamps that actually kind of clamp in on the sides, and then it's got at the bottom here where it locks in. It's kind of like a wheel mechanism where there's just a wheel down there and it kind of rolls in. That wheel down there was loose. So what was happening was when the design was sewing close to the bottom of the crown and it's pushing on that bill, it was popping that bottom of the frame out. The wheel wasn't tight enough that it was keeping it in its place. So issues like that, again, if it's isolated to one head, you can kind of say, okay, what's going on with the machine itself? If it's in the design, every single time it's at stitch 3000, I'm getting a needle break or whatever the problem may be. That's when you start looking at the design itself. So you start going into editing the design, redigitizing the design, resequencing the design, making sure that your design is digitized specifically for hats.
Sometimes it's just loosening up changing the angle of the node. If you're doing puff, you're working with that extreme density. Sometimes just changing the stitch angle just a little bit will loosen up the number of needle penetrations in one spot. And
Absolutely. Yeah, if you have digitizing software and you go in there and you're kind of zoomed in and you're in node editing, you can just see changing an angle, stitch angle, or a node, and you can see several stitches are going to change because it's now calculating the short stitches differently, how it's turning a corner. So yeah, something like that, especially in 3D Puff. I've learned that if we're running something and it's like, all right, in this corner, every single time I'm getting massive thread breaks, or I'm getting a bird's nest, or I'm getting needle breaks, then I know, okay, let's just kind of adjust the way it's coming around this corner. So just changing some nodes, some angles may do it every single time. So as far as the correct theory of center out, bottom up, sometimes there are issues where, like the design we were working, it was unfortunately it was a design that was supplied to us. So, I mean, I do have the capabilities of redigitizing if need to, but um, typically when someone sends us a design, we try to use their design because that's something they're used to. We don't want to change something too much. We do kind of have the disclaimer that we can't control the quality of the design, so it kind of sews the way it sews. But anyways, it was a design that it was starting bottom and center out, but this particular lettering actually had a line of lettering that only went to the side of the hat. It started at the center and went to the side of the hat. So what was happening was sewing that design was kind of making those kind of weird indentations on that side of the hat. So by the time it was coming around and doing the majority of the design, it was kind of hitting the hat differently. So particular instances like that, you may want to focus on the bigger part of the design, work your way center out on the bigger part of the design so it kind of really stabilizes that crown, and then come back and do that small lettering. So there are some caveats when it comes to the rules.
All right, I'm going to grab just a couple more questions here. We have Antonio asked, what needle works best for the Richardson caps? I can tell you I run 7010s most of the time, 7511. The difference in needles, when you name a needle, a 7511, 11 is the U.S. naming convention. The 75 actually means 0.75 millimeter width at the blade of the needle. So when you start looking at, a 65.9, it's 0.65 millimeters wide at the blade. A 70.10 is 0.7, a 75.11 is 0.75, and an 80.12 is 0.8. And what you're doing is you move up needle sizes is the shaft gets wider, larger, it deflects less, it bends less, it will break less. So if you're running a 75.11 sharp on a hat and you're having problems with needle breaks, one of the things you can do to try and get through that order is you can jump up to an 80.12. And you're adding just, it's not a lot of material, but it adds a lot of rigidity to the needle. I don't know. What do you run on your hats, Justin?
Typically it's 75.11 sharps. We have a few different sizes laying around for that reason to try. But generally it's 75.11s.
Yeah. So one of the things also to keep in mind is when you start using a larger shank needle, the holes that it's going to leave are bigger. So your minimum stitch length becomes less, because what you don't want to happen is you get one needle penetration and then it moves over not far enough and it goes to do another needle penetration and it hits in the same hole. And now you've ran one stitch in the exact same hole. Again, you do that too many times, now you're bird nesting. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the ways that digitizing, you can actually make a problem on your machine. Changing your needle, if you go, let's say I went up to a size 100 and I digitize text for a 65.9, I'm going to have so many problems when I run that. I might actually just tear a massive hole in the hat.
Right.
So you can bump up to, an 80.12 is fine, maybe a 90.14. But if you have a lot of really small elements, you're going to want to try to stay with your lower needle sizes, because the smaller the needle number, the smaller the hole that it makes.
And if you check with your supplier or the manufacturer of the needle, they're going to give you the recommended densities on embroidery for that particular needle. So that'll give you a clue that you shouldn't be using a 100 when you're looking at 5 millimeter tall text on a hat. So
yeah, but that's one of the easiest ways to think about it is if you look at the 75, you look at the 80, that's the actual measurement of the needle. So as the needle gets larger, it's a physical change in the measurement of the needle.
Right.
Arnaldo says that they use 80-12 sharps. I would run 80-12s too. I have 70-10s in my machines, and so I just don't change them unless if I need to. Ramona says, can we have a conversation about left of center as in design expectations? Yeah, we can. I can tell you that, the distance, and I don't have a measuring device. And I really wish I did. Oh, wait, I do. So I have a ruler here, and, I've got a standard flex fit. It's a 6277, and that panel is roughly 3.5 inches. Now, if you go between the two physical seams, the stitch lines.
The stitches.
Mm-hmm. Yep. The stitch lines is about 3 inches. So generally when I'm trying to do a left design, if I plan on it being dead center in there and I want to maximize my space, I'm at 2 3/4 inch because I want about 1/8 of an inch between those two stitch lines. If you go much larger, you're going to run over those stitch lines. And if you're just a hair off, you're going to see it when it goes over that stitch line.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it's not about maximizing the space. It's adding operator error in it. You're always going to hoop one half. It's just going to be a little bit off. And if you have no margin for error, you're going to struggle. That's my opinion on that, Justin. I don't know what you think.
I'm dead on. That's my approach to side panel as well.
Yeah. There is something that Justin does that I really, really like, and I wish I had an example of it, and I don't. Well, maybe I do. So it's something that I saw Justin do, and I really like it, is that when he has a design that doesn't quite fill the full left panel, he puts it closer to the far outside seam than he does dead center. And so that's actually something that I started doing when Justin showed me that, is I really like to put the design back to that far left. I think it looks nicer. But it's something that you guys can try and see how you like it, how it works for your customers. It's something a little bit different that, I'd never thought of.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you are maxing that area, even if it's something really short, but that 2 3/4 width, you're definitely going to want to try to center it because you have those centers, the stitches in the seams that you're going to want to center it on. But yeah, it's something that's a little bit smaller or something that's not as wide. I just really like the look where it's kind of tucked either really close to the side or even in that side corner. Kind of gives you that insignia look that you see with brand names. Yeah, something small to me kind of looks kind of weird when it's centered right in that panel. It's kind of floating out there.
All right, so we have another question from Ann. I think that was my backing. If it wasn't backing, let us know. This is from, you can get it from Ganold or Madeira, all stitch. I look for a heavy weight, so 3.5, 4 ounce. I look for something that's got a bit of structure to it, because if you do an unstructured hat, sometimes you have to use 2 layers of it just to make sure that you're getting enough structure in that fabric to sew on.
Right.
Suzanne says this is in regards to the video that we were talking about. She bent the screwdriver from use and she tries to bend it straight. So the curve was unintentional.
Gotcha.
Let's see. Shauna Lee. Sorry. Shauna Lee says, is there a big difference with the type of foam per puff?
So let's put it this way, Shauna Lee. I taught a 3-hour workshop at Long Beach on this particular subject. So there is a lot that has to go into the type of foam, the brand of foam, the density of the foam, the size of the foam. So it's not a one size fits all answer. You'll definitely want to use a quality foam. You don't want to use something that is a craft foam because you're just not going to get the stability when you're embroidering on it. It's just going to flatten out if you are using a craft foam. So the big names out there that you want to try to stick to are from your normal suppliers out there, like the Madeira Bodybuilder is a very popular one. It's a 3 millimeter, pretty dense foam. The Ganold Dense is a good one. I believe they have a 3 and a 4 millimeter in the Ganold Dense.
Yeah, I want to say they've got a bunch of colors too, which is helpful. But I mean, definitely when you're looking at a foam, if it's foam made for embroidery, so Ganold, Madeira, I want to say Sulky, and I think there's another brand that's out there that's being sold. But I know that Justin carries foam on his website it's puffprotools.com.
Yes, 3dpuffprotools.com. I do have a pro foam that I was able to work with. That is a very, very good everyday foam to use. It's got a good density to it, so you can check that out there.
But if it's not made for embroidery, then be a little bit leery. I'm not going to say that I don't have foam sitting in there that's not for embroidery. I've got some really heavy cosplay foam, but if you're just starting out and it's like, hey, what foam do I buy? Go to one of the bigger manufacturers. Make sure that you're buying foam for embroidery. If you go to your local Walmart or whatever, and you go in there and you buy craft foam, it's not going to give you that loft and peak that you're going to be looking for. And you'll start to think, oh, well, maybe it's my file, maybe it's my hooping, maybe it's my machine's not, maybe it's my tension. And a lot of times it's just the quality of the foam. So if you buy a quality foam, then you're going to start out with, you're going to know, okay, well, that just eliminates one variable, or maybe it helps point you to something if you do have a problem and you're not getting the expected finished product that you're looking for.
Exactly. Yeah. I know from my experience, and I think Jeff could say the same, him and I have experimented with those really, really dense cosplay foams or foams that are made for other uses like shoe manufacturing, stuff like that. There's a lot of times we're kind of experimenting in the 3D Puff realm. We've had to kind of sample, edit to make sure that it does get to work with that foam. The end product is it's sharp looking. It's nice and firm. It's got nice sharp edges. But yeah, you definitely have to do some tweaking on your digitizing when you're working with foams that are kind of abnormal. So.
All right. Well, we'll grab a couple more questions here. I just want to make sure that we get them. What's the best cap hoop for Ricoma EM10? 10. The two cap hoops that are out there, your classic band style, might be single or double. These they come from your manufacturers. They come with the machines. And then there's the Hoop Tech Gen 2 that just kind of stabilizes the hat in a different way. Now, the EM1010 has a big plastic piece, if I remember right, underneath there on the backside of the head that will inhibit the bill as it comes forward. So personally, I would stick with the standard cap frames. I think that you're going to have better luck with the ones that you have. They're going to hold the hat a little bit better. Now, the Hoop Tech Gen 2, I love them for unstructured hats. You can hoop an unstructured hat really fast, really well. It holds it really well. But if you're going with structured hats, I'd stick with the one that comes with the machine.
Yeah. Sean Lee asked about my 3-hour workshop. That was a live workshop at the Long Beach ISS show.
I was there.
So that is not available. That was something that you had to do in person, but I did just throw up a link to my other webinars that we did do through the Embroidery Nerd. I have a 3-part series on 3D Puff, which is pretty much all the information that I covered at ISS at the workshop. So check those out. They have a lot of good information from beginning to advanced. So
yeah, and there's stuff that's just, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting, but
that's fine.
The process from selecting materials to hooping the hat to embroidering it, and then it goes into some of the digitizing too. And I think that that's an important part, because even if you don't want to do digitizing, you should still have a little bit of an understanding of what to look for. Because let's say I send a file to Justin and in my head I go, I want that 3D, but I didn't actually type it on a form. I didn't check a little box, and Justin gets it and he digitizes it for not 3D. And I hoop it up on my machine and I hit the start button and I go, man, that's running really fast for a puff design. I go over there and look, and it's not a puff design. It's not digitized for it. You want to be able to spot those types of things, that if there is an issue, that you can go back to your digitizer and say, oh, hey, I forgot, or hey, I'm having a problem with this end cap or this bridge, or this underlay is poking out, something that you can go back to your digitizer and you can give them, pictures help, videos help, but sometimes just being able to know, the right thing to say to that digitizer to get them to fix it. Because I'm sure, it happens that you need to send in an edit request. Somebody forgot,
And Jeff knows this from experience because Justin sent him a file and asked him to sample it for him, and I didn't digitize it for 3D.
No, but it was for 3D. It was
It
supposed to be for 3D.
A portion of it was not digitized for 3D, and he's sitting there looking at me like, "What are you doing here?" So
I remember because I went. I'm like, Justin, because there, if it's not digitized for 3D, there is a lot of cleanup. There's a little bit of cleanup all the time, but if it's not digitized for 3D, then there's a lot of cleanup. And
yes,
I take the longer runtime on the machine over a lot of cleanup any day. But
correct.
Justin, that comes up. We're actually, a minute and 37 seconds into bonus time. So we can go ahead and close it out unless there's anything else you want to throw on the end here.
No, I think that's it. I know this is a good subject that a lot of people discuss in the group. If you guys want to continue this into next week, if you have more questions, post them up in the group. If we see that there's a big response and there's more questions, we'll definitely take it up next week. If not, we will make sure to come up with something else that we can teach you. And always, 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 if you have something, either contact us, email us. Everybody can pretty much find us everywhere on social media. Post it in the group. If you have a problem, if you have a question, if you want to share something, let us know, and we'll definitely cover it on the live if it's something you guys want to hear. So,
all right. And also remember, we do have a Digitizing 911 segment where if you have a file that is giving you fits and you need a little bit of help, you can always reach out to us. We'll bring your file up on the live. We'll go through the changes that we would make and why. So that's another one of those segments that you guys can check in and you can get some help if you need it. But I guess with that is Justin Armenta from JA Digitizing Studios. I am Jeff Fuller from Fuller Embroidery Works, and today we are both here representing the Embroidery Nerd. I'd like to thank you guys for coming out, and we will catch you guys next time.
Good night, everybody.